What if I told you the biggest wars in history weren't fought over land? Or oil? Or even about protecting borders? What if the real reason was something far more human? And a lot more petty? Let's start with a war you probably remember. March 20th, 2003. The United States launches Operation Iraqi Freedom. The official story was terrifying. Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. He was supposedly brewing up nukes like a supervillain in his secret lair. The world was at stake. We had to invade. Except, none of that was true. What was true, however, was that George W. Bush had a personal score to settle. Saddam had once tried to assassinate his dad, George H.W. Bush. And Bush Jr. wasn't about to let that slide. The result? A multi-trillion-dollar war. Hundreds of thousands of lives lost. All wrapped up in a story about security, when it was really about family pride. Now, you might think that's a one-off, a fluke. But one historian, Richard Ned LeBeau, started to wonder. He saw this pattern again and again. Nations talking about strategy, but acting on emotion. So he decided to do the work, to dig through the propaganda. He wanted to find the real, common thread that makes nations fight. LeBeau analyzed 94 different interstate wars. Every major conflict going all the way back to the year 1648. That's almost 4 centuries of data. And what he found turns everything you think you know about war on its head. Most wars are not fought for practical reasons. He found that a staggering 58% of these wars were fought primarily for status. For standing. To look tough. To not be disrespected. Another 10% were fought purely for revenge. Security, the reason we hear about most often, was the main driver in only 18% of wars. And what about resources? Land, oil, money, all that stuff? A tiny 7%. Let me say that again. Only 7% of wars were fought over material gain. The number one cause of war isn't greed or fear. It's ego with a flag. There's a fancy Greek word for this, thumos. It's that part of our human nature that demands recognition and respect. It's what makes a guy with a midlife crisis go out and buy a bright red sports car. And sometimes, it makes an entire country say, "Oh, you think we're weak? Hold my beer." Now, leaders are smart. They don't go on TV and say, "They hurt my feelings." They wrap their wars in logic. They talk about protecting trade routes, securing borders, or liberating people. And sometimes, those things are part of the equation. But so often, it's just camouflage for wounded pride. Let's take a walk through history and see this ego trip in action. We can go all the way back to the Peloponnesian War, fought between 431 and 404 BCE. This wasn't Sparta worrying about an Athenian invasion. This was Athens acting like the popular kid in high school, the prom queen. They turned their alliance, the Delian League, into a personal fan club and ATM. They bragged about their democracy, their pottery, their everything. And Sparta, the quiet, muscle-bound jock of ancient Greece, got sick of it. The historian Thucydides, who literally wrote the book on the war, said it himself. The real cause was Sparta's fear of losing status to a rising, arrogant Athens. This bruised ego led to a 27-year war that left the Greek world in ruins. Fast forward to 1701. The War of the Spanish Succession. The King of Spain, Charles II, died without an heir. And the two big royal families of Europe, the French Bourbons and the Austrian Habsburgs, went nuts. On the surface, it was about the balance of power. They feared that if one family got Spain, they'd become a superpower. But underneath it all, it was about royal honor. Neither dynasty wanted the shame of being the one that lost Spain. So instead of compromise, they dragged Europe into a 13-year war. It ended in 1714 with the Treaty of Utrecht. But the real issue, inflated dynastic egos in powdered wigs, was never solved. Or how about one of the dumbest wars ever, the War of Jenkins Ear? In 1731, a British sea captain named Robert Jenkins claimed Spanish sailors boarded his ship and sliced off his ear. For 8 years, nothing happened. Then, in 1739, the British Parliament suddenly needed an excuse for a war. They needed to look tough, assert naval dominance, and distract from problems at home. So, they literally brought Jenkins to Parliament. And he allegedly held up his severed ear, preserved in a jar, for everyone to see. That ear became the mascot for a war that was really about colonial bragging rights. It was packaged as righteous revenge for one man's cartilage. Let's jump to 1870. The Franco-Prussian War. The man behind this one was Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Prussia. His goal was to unite all the German states into one empire. The only thing in his way was France, led by Napoleon III. So Bismarck got clever. He took a diplomatic telegram, called the EMS Dispatch. And he edited it to make it sound like the French ambassador had been viciously insulted. He basically manufactured outrage. Napoleon III, needing to look strong and defend France's honor, took the bait. He declared war. The result, a total, humiliating French defeat. Napoleon himself was captured. And Bismarck got his dream, a unified German empire, declared in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. All because two leaders needed to prove who was tougher. Then there's World War I. The war that was supposed to end all wars. In 1914, an assassin named Gavrilo Princip shot an archduke. This should have been a regional problem. A diplomatic headache. Instead, it became a global catastrophe. Why? Because it was a chain reaction of national pride. Austria-Hungary couldn't let little Serbia get away with it. They'd look weak. Germany had to back Austria-Hungary to prove it was a world power. Russia had to defend Serbia to maintain its status as the protector of the Slavs. France and Britain had to push back against Germany to keep their own top dog status. It was a global bar fight, where everyone was yelling, "You talkin' to me?" By 1918, over 16 million people were dead. 9.7 million military personnel. 6.8 million civilians. And for what? To prove a point. A point so vague nobody could remember it. The war ended with a treaty so bitter and humiliating, it basically guaranteed a sequel. And that brings us to World War II. We see it as the good war, the clear fight against pure evil. And it was. But we can't forget how it started. Let's rewind to 1919, to the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty didn't just end World War I. It handed Germany a humiliation sandwich. It forced Germany to accept 100% of the blame for the war. It saddled them with reparations that would be worth hundreds of billions today. It stripped them of territory and military power. Enter Adolf Hitler. He didn't rise to power by promising economic stability. He rose to power by promising to restore Germany's lost honor. Nazi propaganda was obsessed with this theme. The theme of Verlorene Ehre, lost honor. In 1933, polls showed that what Germans supported most about Hitler was his aggressive foreign policy. His promise to tear up the treaty and rearm. By the time Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Hitler wasn't just grabbing land. He was playing a game of historical payback on a global scale. Honor wasn't just part of the plan. It was the plan. Even today, this isn't ancient history. Look at Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Sure, you can talk about gas pipelines and strategic buffers. That's the wrapping paper. But underneath it all is wounded Russian pride. Putin saw Ukraine drifting toward the West, toward NATO, toward a different future. And he saw it as a personal and national insult. He's not just trying to win a territory. He's trying to be the man who restores Russia to its rightful place in the world. He wants to be remembered as the leader who made Russia feared and respected again. The ego isn't just a side effect of the war, it's the primary fuel. So what does this all mean? As the writer John Steinbeck said, all war is a symptom of man's failure as a thinking animal. Wars aren't started by rational people carefully weighing the odds. They're started by people driven by the most basic, primal emotions. And who pays the price? The United Nations estimates that today, 90% of all war casualties are civilians. Ordinary people who have no say in the matter. We can't predict the next war with 100% certainty. But maybe we can learn to spot the warning signs. When a leader starts talking less about prosperity and more about pride. When they start demanding respect and promising retribution for past slights. When they talk about national destiny and historical grievances. Maybe it's time to pay very, very close attention. Because wars don't begin when the first shot is fired. They begin in the mind of a leader who feels small. And decides the only way to feel big again is to make someone else bleed. So the next time a politician starts puffing out their chest, maybe don't give them an army. Give them a therapist. Because as history shows us, again and again, we just keep building smarter bombs for dumber men. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one.